few seconds, we will officially get started once I receive the...
Let us pray. Good and gracious God, we thank you for your gift of life, of love, of laughter. Thank you, Lord, for the liberties that we're able to enjoy in this Bahama land. Thank you especially at this time for the contribution made by T. Baswell and Sir William as we have this lecture in their memory and in thanksgiving for their invaluable service. We ask a special blessing on those who lead this organization at this time. And even as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of its founding, we are grateful for all that it has done and ask your guiding hand upon what they would do in the future. Bless all those who have given of their time, their talent, and their treasure to make this evening possible and to be the great opportunity for learning and interaction that it was meant to be. These and all other blessings we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you to 50 Voices and to retired Archdeacon James Palacios. Again, thank you. Minister Michael Halkitis, Central Bank Governor John Roll, Deputy Governor Derek Roll, our distinguished panelists, including Minister Halkitis, Ms. Janine Hodder, and Mr. Robert Sandy Sands, former Governor Wendy Craig, U.S. Chargé d'Affaires Michael Taylor, Central Bank Board of Directors, other distinguished guests, including the wives and families of tonight's honorees. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. I'm your moderator for this evening, Jerome Sawyer, and of all of the speakers and panelists tonight, I have the least amount of credentials on this stage. But I certainly am tasked with the honor of guiding you through such an historic and prestigious event. Tonight, we are honored to have you join us in recognition of the golden anniversary of the Central Bank of the Bahamas. Tonight, through this exercise, we continue to recognize 50 years of economic and financial developments in the Bahamas. This event is the latest in a series designed to educate the public on the roles and functions of the central bank, while also honoring two former governors, the late Mr. T. Baswell Donaldson and the late Sir William C. Allen. We begin tonight with a message from the Governor of the Central Bank of Barbados on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Central Bank of the Bahamas.
I extend warmest congratulations to Governor Roll and the Central Bank of the Bahamas on your 50th anniversary. This momentous milestone stands as a shining testimony to your enduring commitment to fostering monetary stability and promoting economic development, which has significantly contributed to the creation of a stable and sound financial system in the Bahamas. Over the past 5 decades, you have aptly navigated the complexities of the global economic landscape while solidifying the Bahamas' position as a resilient and thriving economy. Your remarkable achievements in financial inclusion and regulation underscore your unwavering dedication to embracing the future while honoring the rich legacy of the past. These strides not only inspire but also set a benchmark for central banks across the region. The Central Bank of Bahamas has also advanced the work of various regional central bank working groups to solve common problems. As we reflect on this significant milestone, we celebrate the visionary leadership and the tireless dedication of the individuals who have propelled the Central Bank of Bahamas forward. Your journey has been characterized by resilience, innovation, and a steadfast commitment to financial well-being of the Bahamian people. As you embark on the next chapter, the next half-century, we, your fellow CARICOM governors, anticipate continuing our partnership, sharing our knowledge, and working together towards a prosperous and stable Caribbean region. Welcome to the 50th year old club. The Central Bank of Barbados turned 50 in 2022, and so you now join us in this journey. Congratulations once again on your golden anniversary. May the Central Bank of Bahamas continue to strive and lead with distinction for many more years to come.
Thank our friends in Barbados for those remarks. Tonight's program is split into two for the benefit of the audience. We have a few brief remarks, followed by a panel discussion in which we will invite your interaction later on. But first, coming to bring opening remarks is the man who continues to carry the legacy.
Bahamas. Welcome to this 50th anniversary memorial lecture. We've chosen this evening's topic to be relevant to a domestic audience, not abstract in any philosophical sense, relatable to the challenges on which Bahamians of all walks of life trade. It also speaks to a consequential track record of low average inflation, inherited, I stress that inherited from the American experience, and stability and certainty for foreign capital that has continued to be invested and propel the Bahamian economy forward. As we mark this institutional achievement, it is fitting to celebrate all who have contributed to the work of the central bank over the last half-decade, and those who are still active in that mission. This evening's lecture is a fitting memorial to the first two governors who laid the foundation for everything that the bank has achieved since 1974, including the exemplary leaderships of Governors Smith, Francis, and Craig. It is also an achievement that rests on the shoulders of the directors, management, and staff, both past and present, of the central bank. I say thank you to all of them. As we proceed with the lecture and panel discussion with that in mind, I'm very grateful to our keynote speaker, panelists, and our very competent moderator. We look forward to a very stimulating and constructive dialogue. Welcome again, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Governor Roll. I have to admit that I learned something new just now. I was holding on to my 1985 notes thinking they would be worth a lot more at some point, but that's good to know that they're still worth the same. So thank you very much for your remarks. Tonight's event, while helping us to understand the role of the central bank and so many other things about economic and financial development, is also an opportunity for us to pay tribute to two men who not only helped to build the central bank, but also to maintain its stability. It is my pleasure now to invite you to view this tribute to our honorees, Mr. T. Basil Donaldson and Sir William Allen.
fact that we had two other governors, Sir William Allen, and before him, T.B. Donaldson. So they were some of the early governors in the central bank. When you think back on those two governors, do you have any fond memories about them that you'd like to share?
For me, the most important characteristic of both Sir William and Tim Donaldson was that they, one, believed, I would say, in the integrity of the central bank, and they were committed to defending it. And then the other point I would make is that they were both, I think, very, very effective ambassadors of the central bank with the banking community. And they were very much respected and loved, I would almost say, by the banking community and those who they regulated.
My remembrance of him is as a friend, an economist, central banker, and a problem solver. And I hope I join that same tradition.
And what are your memories, Governor Smith?
No, Tim Donaldson, the first governor, was flamboyant, and he had a personality that, like a cut above. And starting a new institution, image is everything. And I think he was able to project the kind of image that central bank needed with confidence, because unless the public exceptional as knowing what you're doing, having their interests, it's a difficult time. And Tim and those, they worked well. Plus, he was really good at forming the right alliances.
Mr. Donaldson was a very personable individual. If you hear many stories about him, you would hear that he knew people by name. The bank was very small then compared to what it is today, but he knew everyone. He knew their families. He would walk the halls of the bank and greet people. Then you had Mr. William, and he was really the one that shaped the research department that I was a part of. In terms of policy making, Sir William was the one who started the Monetary Policy Committee. And Sir William, I remember him fondly too for his interest in scholarship. He was keenly interested in ensuring that all of the central bank staff were well trained and had opportunities to grow. So he started the scholarship program internally, the training programs he put in place. The central bank really focused on ensuring that its staff, were competent in central banking. And so that's a role that he played. And then, of course, he had a strong cultural bent. And so he started the art exhibition. And he wanted to ensure that the central bank was, similar to other central banks that he had seen overseas. They sponsored the arts because they had the resources to do so. And he found this as an excellent way for the central bank to encourage the development and growth of Bahamian artists. And so that commenced annual art exhibitions that they continue today.
Yes.
Correct. They continue to the day.
And we are so appreciative for that tribute. Thank you so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the theme of the night is inclusive and resilient growth. Our keynote speaker for the evening will lay the framework for our panel discussion later on. She will speak to us on the level of inclusion in the Bahamas across different spheres, as well as some key determinants of resilience for small island developing states. Tonight's keynote address comes to us from a lady who is no stranger to many spheres of this society. Dr. Tanya McCartney is an assistant professor of law at the University of the Bahamas and the CEO and president of GEM Management and Advisory Services Limited. She's a UK-trained barrister, chartered banker, former CEO and executive director of the Bahamas Financial Services Board. Dr. McCartney served as the managing director of RBC Finco and is a former senator, one of the youngest people ever appointed to the upper house. Her bio reads extensive and impressively, but My job tonight is simply to introduce her. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome to the stage our keynote address, or the person bringing our keynote address tonight, Dr. Tanya McCartney.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Jerome. He didn't tell you how far back we go. We were in 4th grade and 5th grade together, all the way back to St. John's Prep, so it's a pleasure to have him moderate this session. Protocol having already been established, good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to stand before you this evening as your keynote speaker, as we memorialize former central bank governors T.B. Donaldson and Sir William Allen with this prestigious lecture. I had the good fortune to know both gentlemen, to observe their commitment to the growth and development of the Bahamas, and to be inspired by them, to bring my best self in service to country and to my fellow man. Mr. Donaldson gave me my first job in financial services. He interviewed me as a young civil servant, as he was the chairman of the bank that I was about to be employed by. When I revealed to him that I was bonded because of my government scholarship, he promptly sent me down the street from Charlotte House to find out how much money I owed the government and to come back and tell him. He ensured that it was paid off and later engaged me. For that, I am grateful, because it started a wonderful journey in financial services for me as a professional. Later, in 2001, I met Sir William during his tenure as Minister of Finance. And that was when I was appointed as a government senator in 2001. I had a lot to learn about public finance and accounting, because in 2002, I would offer as a candidate in the general election. So William was a willing tutor. It is therefore with a sense of humility and gratitude to you, Governor Roll, that I give this address under the watchful eyes of my president and my economics lecturer, Dr. Olivia Saunders. But here goes it. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in preparing for this address, I thought it was important to look at how we currently assess economic growth in the Bahamas, and then proceed to answer 3 fundamental questions. 1, what do we mean by inclusive and resilient growth? To what extent can economic growth in the Bahamas be described as inclusive and resilient? And thirdly, how best can we position ourselves as a country to materialize the growth prospects for inclusion and resilience? In Western economies, the primary criterion for evaluating a nation state has always been the magnitude of economic output. The concept of the wealth of nations, initially proposed by Adam Smith in 1776, served as the foundation. The development of modern gross domestic product occurred in the 20th century due to a convergence of political and economic factors. Since then, GDP has long been the standard indicator used to assess the state of a country's economy, offering insights on economic activity by representing the value of goods and services produced inside a nation's boundaries. The regularity of data compilation, the composite nature of GDP, and its scope make it widely accepted as a reliable basis for macroeconomic policy. But there are constraints. GDP is unable to provide a comprehensive evaluation of the overall welfare of a society. It fails to factor in wealth distribution, Moreover, it does not account for the reduction of natural resources or the negative impact on the environment caused by production. Robust economic growth can conceal expanding income inequalities, which can result in the marginalization of citizens. In predominantly service-based economies such as ours, reliant on tourism and financial services, this is even more evident. By valuing goods and services within our country's borders, the value of intangibles such as knowledge, innovation, brand equity, which are critical to these sectors, is overlooked. GDP quantifies the commodities and services that are produced within the market. And based on our GDP per capita, the Bahamas is the richest nation in the Caribbean, followed closely by Guyana, which recently struck oil. That's if we exclude Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, which are British overseas territories. Prime Minister Davis, in his most recent budget communication, noted that the recently released GDP estimates revealed that real GDP growth was in the region of 2.6% in 2023, largely driven by the tourism sector. He noted that the household consumption rate had increased by 8% in 2023 as well, suggesting that this was indicative of growth impacting the lives of average Bahamians. Yet, if we chart our GDP growth rate across time, we see that there have been peaks and valleys, mostly produced by external factors. Small island developing states are inherently and uniquely susceptible to external shocks due to factors such as their small size, geography, scattered populations, limited and undiversified economies, a heavy reliance on external markets, and significant exposure to natural disasters and the impact of climate change. Accordingly, we must acknowledge the fragility of our current state. But acknowledging fragility does not imply weakness or a lack of capacity to progress. Rather, it is an acceptance that countries such as ours experience a far higher degree of physical devastation and suffer bigger non-economic and economic loss compared to other countries. And I think at this point, my former lecturer would say, we need to look beyond the numbers. The European Council's 2021 paper, Beyond GDP, Measuring What Matters, highlights the need for more comprehensive metrics that capture well-being, sustainability, and inequality. Similarly, the OECD's Better Life Index attempts to measure progress based on various factors including education, health, and environmental quality. These alternative frameworks emphasize the importance of social and environmental factors beyond mere economic growth. Considering broader measures will allow for us to focus on human well-being with investment in areas to improve quality of life and a more sustainable and equitable future. Alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, is key. In particular, Goal 8, which is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. In the 2021 UN Common Country Analysis of the Bahamas, it was indicated that little progress has been made in achieving the UN SDGs. Understanding the impact of Hurricane Dorian and the pandemic impeded the country's ability to do more, the report outlined, and I quote, "These regressions are not surprising, but it is a call to make sure that during the decade of action, greater effort is made to achieve the 2030 agenda and to make sure that inclusive socioeconomic development is achieved." Ladies and gentlemen, What then do we mean by inclusive and resilient growth? Inclusive growth as an economic model prioritizes the participation and benefit of all citizens, creating opportunities for every Bahamian, regardless of their background, income level, or location. Inclusive development is balanced and characterized by equitably distributed growth. It emphasizes the reduction of poverty as a specific objective of economic development and focuses on eradicating inequalities, in particular income inequality. It encompasses economic expansion that benefits all segments of society, not just the affluent, and focuses on achieving sustainable and equitable prosperity by giving all citizens the opportunity to participate and to contribute to economic progress. Christine Lagarde, the former managing director of the IMF, put it this way in considering inclusive growth. When the benefits of growth are shared more broadly, growth is stronger, more durable, and more resilient. She positions inclusive growth as a precursor to sustainable and resilient growth. Resilient growth, therefore, encompasses the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances, technological advancements, and to respond to external shocks. Several definitions of economic resilience narrows its scope to the capacity to swiftly rebound. And I know we hear a lot about our economy rebounding, especially in light of the pandemic and after Hurricane Dorian. However, within the framework of economic development, the objective of economic resilience is broader, as it seeks to enhance a country's ability to predict, endure, and recover from the various forms of shocks, disruptions, or stresses that may be encountered. Let us now consider then to what extent our economic growth in the Bahamas can be described as inclusive and resilient. Despite a relatively high GDP per capita, the Bahamas struggles with significant income disparities and poverty. Poverty is defined or can be defined as the persistent lack of food, clothing, shelter, clean water, and health services. The gap in economic well-being is not reflected in GDP per capita figures. In 2013, the government, in collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank, undertook a household expenditure survey. The survey offered a comprehensive overview of the living conditions of the population in the Bahamas. There had not been a similar study since 2001. And this poverty data estimated that 12% of the population lived below the Bahamas' poverty line, compared to 9.3% in 2001. The 2013 study also indicated, among other things, that the poverty rate was significantly higher in the Family Islands at 17.2% than in New Providence at 12.4% and Grand Bahama at 9.4%. The majority of the poor resided in New Providence, our population center, that is 71.5%. And further, the poverty rate was highest for people younger than 20 years, which has social implications. The correlation between poverty and education was amplified in the 2013 study. The occurrence of poverty was almost 25% for households where the head had no formal education, and 12.3% for households with a head with primary education. In contrast, incidences of poverty amongst households where the head had at least some college education was lower than 1%. The UN Development Program, in its 2021 assessment of the impact of Dorian and the pandemic, indicated that 14.8% of the Bahamian population lived below the poverty line in 2017, compared to the 12% indicated in 2023. Food insecurity, natural disasters, and challenges associated with a tourism-dependent economy are all contributing factors to poverty in the Bahamas. The Bahamas also contends with significant inequality. We can measure inequality using a calculation called the Gini coefficient. And many of us don't need the Gini coefficient to see that there is inequality. But it's a lecture, so I'll explain what that coefficient means. The coefficient it's a number between 0 to 100, where 0 means perfect equality. Everyone has the same amount of money, and 100 means perfect inequality. One person has all the money, and everyone else has nothing. The Bahamas was estimated to have a Gini coefficient of 41.1 in 2013, which is considerably higher than the average for high-income countries. A Gini coefficient of 41.1 illustrated that there was a big difference between the wealthy and less fortunate in this country. This means that a small percentage of the population controlled a disproportionate share of wealth. Additionally, there were limited opportunities for economic mobility, making it difficult for individuals to improve their economic status. Now, that was 2013, and maybe we'll find out what the current situation is, but one could only imagine in light of all of the shocks that we've had. In addition, the World Bank Macro Poverty Outlook for 2023 revealed that despite post-pandemic recovery, economic growth is constrained by capacity limits in tourism, vulnerability to external shocks, skill shortages, and limited fiscal space. This report also detailed that as of May 2023, labor force participation was at a low 75.9%, still below the pre-pandemic level of 81%. The unemployment rate for individuals aged 25 to 35 was 25%, nearly triple the national average. Admittedly, we need more current statistics on poverty and inequality to assess the current situation and the real impact of Hurricane Dorian. But I think we all get a picture of where we stand as it relates to poverty and inequality. With the data available, it is important to note, however, that all is not lost. Minister, all is not lost. Although facing socioeconomic issues, the Bahamas achieved a ranking of 57th on the Human Development Index in 2022, placing it at a similar level as other Caribbean countries. The Human Development Index combines factors such as life expectancy, education levels, and per capita income to provide a broader view of human well-being in the economic context. So we now have an idea of what inclusive and resilient growth means. We've looked at the question of inclusion in the context of poverty and inequality. Let us now consider Bahamian ownership in the economy as we look at inclusion. The Vision 2040 State of the Nation report noted that ownership of the tourism industry is concentrated among a few foreign investors. That is no secret. And there is clearly an opportunity to increase Bahamian participation in this sector. What then of financial services? With respect to domestic supervised financial institutions, out of a total of 35 institutions, there are 20 domestic supervised financial institutions with Bahamian ownership. Although these statistics do not speak to market share, the level of Bahamian participation at 57% is encouraging. With respect to international supervised financial institutions, 5 of the 51 international banks and trust companies operating from within the Bahamas have some percentage of Bahamian ownership. That is less than 10%. The question here is, how can we increase Bahamian ownership in the international financial services space? Do we need to look at capital requirements? Do we need to reconsider licensing fees? It is also interesting to note that the number of domestic supervised financial institutions with females at the helm or as deputy, we call them senior 1 or senior 2 for those in the banking space, out of 35 of these domestic SFIs, 9 of them have females at the helm or as deputy. That's 25.7%. Whereas the number of international supervised financial institutions with females at the helm or as deputy was 40 out of 51, or 78.4%. It would be interesting to know precisely what is driving this differential and whether diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and regulations in more developed countries where their head offices are located is driving this number. As we consider inequality, we must also acknowledge that financial inclusion is essential for achieving inclusive economic growth. Financial inclusion is a powerful tool for social inclusion. In addressing financial inclusion, we must consider the affordability of financial services, availability, financial literacy, and consumer protection, among other factors. In addressing the issue of affordability of banking services, some countries in the region have taken the policy position of limiting how much banks and financial institutions can charge customers for specific products. We had the governor of the Central Bank of Barbados bring greetings. In January of this year, it was announced by the Central Bank of Barbados that no fees were to be imposed for electronic transactions through the automated clearinghouse. It would be interesting to know whether our regulators are considering such action. In terms of availability of and access to banking services, we know that this is a challenge within many of our family islands. Certainly, the central bank is to be commended for the pioneering introduction of the central bank digital currency, the sand dollar, and its efforts to increase adoption. But certainly, we have some ways to go. There is also the complexity associated with opening bank accounts, potentially hampering inclusivity. The Central Bank of the Bahamas, in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce in 2022, surveyed a number of businesses on their experience with opening bank accounts. The average wait time to get an account opened was over 2 months. Only 1/3 of accounts were opened within 2 weeks or less. And about 40% of accounts in absolute time took more than 1 month to be opened. Inclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, I mentioned earlier the limitations associated with the measurement of GDP. It also ignores the informal sector. The informal sector encompasses economic activities that are not regulated or taxed by the government. In 2017, the Inter-American Development Bank study estimated that the informal sector in the Bahamas represented 20 to 30% of all economic activity, which is quite sizable and is largely linked to the tourism sector. This represents a vulnerable segment of the population. Ignoring the contribution of the informal sector undermines the true picture of economic activity and the well-being of the population as policies, programs, and incentives target the formal economy. You may be thinking now, what about economic resilience? Remember that resilience is about the ability of the economy to prevent, withstand, and promptly recover from significant economic shocks. There is a heavy reliance on tourism to drive GDP numbers, as we all know. In 2017, according to the World Travel and Tourism Council, international tourists contributed 72.8% of overall exports in the Bahamas through their expenditure. In addition, tourism's total impact represented 38.2% of the Bahamas' GDP in 2019 and 51.5% of total employment. In February of this year, the Ministry of Tourism reported that the number of visitors in 2023 were above the predicted forecast, setting a new record. In 2023, the nation achieved a significant milestone as top global tourism destination by attracting a record-breaking 96.5 million visitors. This figure signifies a surge of 38% in comparison to the year 2022 and a 33% rise when compared to the previous high set in 2019. And you know, we struggle with whether we rely on tourism too much. We talk about diversification of our economy. But the IMF identified tourism as a key driver of global economic recovery and growth in a 2023 report. In fact, the report specifically stated that countries where tourism represents a high percentage of GDP have recorded faster recovery from the impacts of the pandemic and represents a high percentage of GDP. It states that countries where tourism represents a high percentage of GDP have recovered faster from the impacts of the pandemic in comparison to countries where tourism is not a significant sector. In a scholarly work entitled Tourism Development, Governance, and Sustainability in the Bahamas, my colleagues at the University of the Bahamas, Dr. Sophia Roll, Associate Professor Jessica Minnis, and Dr. Ian Bethel Bennett, analyzed the intricacies of the nation's tourism industry. And I think they'd want me to say, please buy their book. They published a book. This study asserts that although locals typically acknowledge the positive impact of tourism on their lives and communities, they desire greater involvement and authority in the planning and implementation of tourism projects. The key assessment of their work was that adaptable and flexible policies are needed to help SIDS like us navigate the complexities of climate change, sustainable development, and a thriving offering in tourism for the 21st century. How resilient, then, is the banking and financial services sector, you may be wondering. Currently, there is an excessive reliance on cash handling services, which hinders the smooth recovery of commerce in situations where banks are unable to provide their usual physical support. The full implementation or the implementation of fully accessible and enabled digital mobile payments would effectively address multiple logistical difficulties. Project Sand Dollar also has the capacity to provide long-term resilience. And the pandemic gave some insights into the level of resilience of the financial sector, with institutions invoking their business continuity plans, customers transitioning to digital services, regulators adjusting to remote supervision measures with electronic filings, and banks also introducing forbearance measures. The financial services sector also benefits from ongoing stress testing. With this backdrop, I am led to ask, my last question, how best can we position ourselves as a country to materialize our growth prospects for inclusion and resilience? The 4th International Conference on Small Island Developing States took place in Antigua and Barbuda in May of this year. At the end of the conference, world leaders officially approved and accepted the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, a renewed declaration for resilient prosperity, which places a high importance on and makes firm promises to assist SIDS in attaining sustainable development and strong economic growth in the next 10 years. The agenda lays out a roadmap for small island states to navigate the challenges that we face. And I wish only to highlight 4 preconditions identified for achieving resilient prosperity, which are capable of serving as pillars upon which we can build. 1, sustainable and inclusive economic transformation. The agenda recognizes the need for economic diversification beyond traditional sectors. This entails embracing innovative technologies, fostering entrepreneurship, developing the blue economy, and promoting sustainable tourism. Secondly, enhanced climate resilience. Through increased investment and adaptation measures, this includes strengthening infrastructure, developing climate-smart agriculture, and promoting sustainable coastal management. Further, the agenda calls for robust international cooperation to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and provide financial support for climate action. And we know that the Bahamas has been taking the lead on this, with our Attorney General making submissions to the International Court of Justice and taking a leading role in the COP dialogue. Thirdly, sustainable and efficient energy systems. Transitioning to renewable energy sources is critical for SIDS to reduce their carbon footprint and enhance energy security. The agenda emphasizes investing in solar, wind, and geothermal power alongside energy efficiency measures. The announcement of the National Energy Reform Policy on Monday by the government was welcome news in this regard. And fourthly, fostering capacity building and human capital development. The Antigua Agenda emphasizes investing in education, training, and research, empowering youth and women, and fostering innovation and technology transfer, including promoting good governance, strengthening institutions, and fostering partnerships for knowledge sharing and capacity building. To achieve inclusive and resilient growth, we all have a role to play: the government, the private sector, and us as individuals. The government's role is crucial by creating a business environment with clear, transparent regulations, providing incentives and support to businesses that invest in education, innovation, and sustainability, implementing policies that promote social equity and reducing inequality through public-private sector partnership. By investing in sustainable technologies and practices, supporting skills development programs, the private sector can also foster inclusive growth by creating jobs and opportunities for marginalized communities, thereby leading to resilience. As individuals, we too have a duty to contribute by supporting local businesses through volunteerism, advocating for policies that promote social justice and economic fairness, and investing in our own education. As I close, I wish to acknowledge the successes that we have achieved over the past 50 years as an independent nation. We stand as a beacon within the region. However, we cannot rest on our laurels. There are still structural, economic, and social issues, some of which I have outlined, that the Bahamas faces, despite the high levels of human development and despite our GDP per capita. The path to inclusive and resilient growth is not without challenges. Nevertheless, working together, we can overcome them and create an even brighter future for the Bahamas. I look forward to the dialogue between the distinguished panelists on how we are working to achieve this essential objective, and I hope that I have met my mandate of laying the foundation for what I expect to be an engaging discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Keynote Speaker. We certainly appreciate your presentation this evening, and you have given all of us in this room much to think about. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite now our panelists to the stage to take their seats, beginning first of all with the Honorable Michael Halkitis. He is qualified as a chartered financial analyst. He was first elected to Parliament in 2002 and again in 2012. He currently serves as the Minister of Economic Affairs and Leader of Government Business in the Senate. His portfolio responsibilities include the promotion of financial services, small business development, ease of doing business, consumer protection, and international trade. Ladies and gentlemen, our first panelist, the Honorable Michael Halkitis.
Wrong seat. That's the wrong seat.
Great. Our second panelist for the evening, Ms. Janine Hodder, is the acting president of the University of the Bahamas. She was president of the former College of the Bahamas and was the first woman appointed to head a university in Quebec, Canada, where she was named principal and vice chancellor of Bishop's University. She began her career in the Bahamas at Queen's College, the Bahamas Teachers College, and the College of the Bahamas, a leader in education, higher education, and in public administration. We are happy to welcome Ms. Janine Hodder. And our third panelist, Mr. Robert Sandy Sands, Senior Vice President of Administration and External Relations at Bahamar. He started his career at the Nassau Beach Hotel back in 1971 and served as general manager at various hotels in the Caribbean and the Bahamas, more notably Carnival's Crystal Palace and Casino, Crystal Palace Riviera Tower, Nassau Wyndham Resort, to name a few. He received the coveted Cacique Hotelier of the Year award for his outstanding contributions to the development of tourism in the Bahamas, and in 2023, in recognition of the 50th anniversary of the Bahamas' independence, he is the recipient of the Bahamas' special Golden Jubilee of Independence Award. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Robert Sandy Sands, our third panelist.
I think the moderator is going to...
All right, and can you hear me okay here? Finally, I get to sit. All right. Thank you very much. The keynote speaker, Tanya McCartney, mentioned that we went to prep school together. She didn't say which year. I'm very happy because, unlike the bank that's happy to celebrate 50 years, there are certain anniversaries I like to keep to myself. But again, thank you to our panelists for agreeing to be a part of this discussion tonight. We're going to field some questions to you and give you an opportunity to engage. I'm Michael Halkitis, Minister Halkitis. I'm going to begin with you. I'm certain that we're all happy to see the strong economic growth coming out of the pandemic, which has exceeded domestic and international expectations. To you, sir, what are the kinds of policies that the government can pursue to ensure that growth is inclusive, broad-based, and resilient? Start with that.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all. I want to just thank the Central Bank for including me in this panel discussion. Mr. Moderator, I think the primary job one of the government in terms of economic policy is ensuring that we have an economic environment that is stable and conducive to promoting local business, first of all, and as well attracting foreign business. So we're talking in terms of a government policy that promotes economic growth, that promotes strong revenue administration, the containment of expenditure, so that you as a government, you have lower deficits, lower debt accumulation, a lower debt burden, low inflation, even though much of it is imported, and so to provide that foundation for the conduct of business and for the attracting of investment. Job one of the government, promoting an economic environment conducive to doing business. And when we talk about inclusion and equity, we as a country are small enough that we still have certain, as part of government policy over several administrations, segments of the economy that are preserved for Bahamians. I think we have all put in efforts to promote the development of small business, the ease of doing business. So we see that, for example, businesses under a certain threshold are relieved of certain reporting requirements, even paying of business license fees, for example. And again, the preservation of certain segments for Bahamians, the promotion of funding, guarantees, et cetera. We've had a number of them over the years to support small business. So when we talk about inclusion, new businesses, businesses owned by women, businesses owned by young people. And those are some of the policies that I think we pursue. The policy of digitization of government services to promote the ease of doing business and easier access to government services. A commitment to financial inclusion, as was said in the opening remarks. We have had challenges in terms of debanking, to use a word that I'm coining right now, of the family islands, and now the policy of government to promote digitization of services in those locations. So job number one, laying the foundation, and then just promoting policies to promote equity and a broadening of the economic base.
Minister, if I may just place a follow-up question right here. Mm-hmm. One of the greatest concerns I hear from business owners, whether they be small, medium, or in some case large, is the difficulty of doing business in the Bahamas. We heard in the keynote address, as simple as opening a bank account can take as long as 3 months. These are deterrents. What is being done from a policy perspective to address that issue? And I hear it constantly in various quarters I go, whether it be very small, operating out of my house, straight up to medium-sized, even larger businesses, talking about the many difficulties that they face.
Particularly in opening, if I were to address the point of opening the bank account, I think several years ago, the central bank adopted the position that they would adopt a risk-based approach. And I think they have encouraged the banking community to adopt a similar approach. I don't think that has had the level of success that we would all like to see, because I think financial institutions err on the side of caution. They would rather over know your customer than under know your customer, so to speak. And so I think we all recognize that there should be a distinction between the various classifications of customers. Unfortunately, I think banks, given the whole environment of, they look at certain banks and see the fines and the other penalties that have been imposed on banks for the lack of due diligence, and they make the decision that they would rather not be bothered. So I think that is despite all the efforts, and the governor will tell you that he communicates with the banks, and they say we're adopting this risk-based approach. I think there's still that reluctance to really loosen the reins. As far as the government is concerned, when we talk about business, for smaller businesses, we've relaxed certain reporting requirements. We've tightened it on larger businesses. But for to encourage that segment, we've relaxed certain reporting requirements. And we believe that the program to digitize government services will, again, ease the whole process of beginning a business, especially when you have to interact with several government agencies.
Ms. Hunter, education and skills building are critical for developing a viable, competitive, and productive workforce. How do you foresee the development and evolution of the tertiary education sector in the Bahamas in contributing to inclusivity and resilience for those who must play a role in our nation's future economic success? In short, are we heading in the right direction?
That's a tough one, the right direction, but let's go back to the first part of the question. I think that there are two things that we need to focus on when we talk about tertiary education. And the first is obvious, it's participation rates. And I just want you all to have a little thought experiment right now. We're 10 years down the road, and there's a degree in every home in the country, whatever the degree is. I'm sure you're beginning to see the impact that has. The transformation of often that a dream. The goal should be there's a degree in every single home in this country within the next 10 years. Whether that's a certificate, whether it's BTVI, whether it's university. Number one, participation rates. At the moment, participation rates are still low, and we're struggling also with something that universities and education institutions generally deal with because it's long-term. We're still suffering from the after effects of the pandemic and the loss of learning and the challenges that young people have had to catch up with the loss of learning. So at the tertiary level, we're dependent on what the high schools are bringing forward to us. We'll start with the first one, let's increase participation rates, and we're working very hard to do that. We're doing that as we speak right now. We're looking at bridge programs within the university. We're trying to do early admissions. We're trying to track students. So number one, increase and maintain high participation. The second one is diversification. If we're talking about inclusion, we have, most of you in this room, or many of you, will be very familiar with the traditional four-year baccalaureate program, followed by a master's program, and I think that still will serve a large number of students. A large number of students will enjoy going into a four-year baccalaureate program. Many of our programs are geared towards direct employment, nursing, teaching, accounting, finance, and they serve that population well. But there's another kind of programming that we're looking at to expand. And for lack of a better word, I'm going to call it micro-credentialing. To begin to understand that not everybody wants to go through a four-year baccalaureate, and not everything in the labor market requires a four-year baccalaureate. And so we experimented this year with a number of programs. We did one in collaboration. We did with I think it was the university, was at Cambridge, that we did a collaboration on cryptocurrency as a short-intensive program. We did another one, which is not so short. It was a 16-week boot camp program, full on, full day, on data analytics. So these are credential programs that you can put on your CV, put in LinkedIn, and they're open for people who are either in a traditional program that want to add to their baccalaureate degree, or they don't want to do a baccalaureate degree. We've done a skills certification in culinary. We've also done another short program in artificial intelligence with combination with OPM and in Foundation and King Abdullah University. So we are actually within the university about to create a VP portfolio essentially focused on innovation, with the recognition that while there'll always be a place for a traditional four-year program, we need to diversify, we need to attract more broadly. And I don't know whether the question is going to come up, but the other part of the diversification and attracting more broadly is also as a result of our deep concern about the participation of boys and young men. We can come back to that maybe later, but that's another way of saying what can we do to reach out to boys and young men and increase their participation. So that would be how
no time like the present. That was going to be my follow-up question, actually. I think, as many countries look to include education at every level for women and girls in schools, for the Bahamas and other countries in the region, the reverse is actually true, where we see the enrollment rate and the graduation rate for our males continues to decline. What's being done to try and encourage more male enrollment and even to the point of graduation?
Well, let's start with, let's be clear, it's 3-to-1. So, 3/4 of our students are women, and that's been steady. So it's a vexing problem. You've mentioned that in the introduction, it's not a problem just in the Bahamas, It's a problem in almost all developed economies. And so there are two approaches to that problem. One is to understand it, and there are things we do know about it. This is much more an effect that's related to poverty and class. So poorer boys are more likely to drop out. It's also related to, the facility of getting into the labor market, even if you're at a low pay early, and the pressure on young men, on boys, to actually bring and earn. And I've had students who are members of a fraternity at the University of The Bahamas. When I said, well, what brought you here? And one of them sort of jokingly said, well, I gave up on having a girlfriend, thought I needed a degree first because I couldn't afford a girlfriend. That made me think, what is it that the pressure on young men to be bringing in earnings rapidly when they know that they don't know, but that their long-term earning power is clearly diminished with lack of education. So moving from that, which is what are the reasons, what are the drivers, what are the social norms that make that happen? I guess I move to the second question. What do boys like about school? What are we doing about making school fun? How do you make the environment fun? And I'm going to invite you again to go back to your own families and children and start thinking about, do schools today create a sense of identity for boys? Whether it's, Scouts or Boys Brigade, or what are schools doing co-curricularly that would allow boys to feel identification with the school? Because you can say you should want to go to school, but clearly you need to have boys like it. And what are we doing to make that positive for them? And that's a question I'd ask the K-12 sector. With respect to the university, we work very, very, very hard, both at recruiting and at retaining, and at what I'm going to describe as making people feel they belong. I just talked to you a little bit about Greek life, but we start our first year experience with a huge effort. You actually have to take a course. It's called the first year experience, where we try to create a home identity, a sense of belonging, a sense of this is a place where you want to be. And because it's easy to say you should be doing this, it's equally important, and you should, it's equally important to say, this is really great to be doing. And finally, I would say the other part is I think we need to diversify the programs we offer. I think we need to encourage a better balance between full-time and part-time work. It would be great to see a partnership with employers and say, look, we've got this great student, they need a job, they need a part-time, please don't hire him more than 15 hours, we want him to succeed. So can we agree that there's a limit on the number of hours that a student would work? Increase the number of internships, beginning to look also whether we could do co-op programs. Again, part of our VP innovation would be, can we design some co-op programs? We understand, and we think they'll be particularly attractive to boys. The final remark I would say about that, you know what? Could we stop gender stereotyping some professions? How many of you remember when we used to have ads showing women as engineers as a role model? So it's okay if you want to be an engineer? I'm going to go with, it's great if you want to be a teacher and you're a guy. It's great if you want to be a nurse and you're a guy. So can we make the same kind of effort in looking in some of those key service professions that we also encourage the participation of boys and young men? And I'm going to end, my heart has also always been very tied to elementary school education, where I began my career. I think it'd be great if we had a whole lot more, many more male teachers in elementary and high schools to support the growth of young men.
Thank you.
I haven't solved the problem, but I hope I've given you some ideas.
You've given us lots to think about. Thank you. Mr. Sands, your question. For the tourism sector, from the tourism sector's perspective, what do you see as the unmet opportunities for Bahamians that could either position them more prominently in careers in the industry, or suppliers of more input being consumed by tourists?
That's a big question, especially after my substantive minister spoke in Parliament today. But first of all, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this lecture series. And this topic of resilience is so important because for resilience to take place in our tourism sector, we need institutions that have sustainability. And I am sure that the central bank decided to have this lecture here in this hotel, which was opened in 1924 and has reinvented itself for many, many periods to ensure future employment and economic benefits to the Bahamas. But to answer the question more specifically, I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 particular issues. First and foremost for me is entrepreneurship and prominent employment in the sector. Not general employment, prominent employment, leadership roles, management roles, etc., but entrepreneurship. Secondly, we always talk about the potential for proverbial pie. Now, I had some figures that I was going to present tonight, but I'm going to go with the minister's figures because they're slightly higher than mine. Tourism contributes approximately in 2023, but not the 96 million, Madam Speaker, this morning, but 9,600,000, 6 million. So almost $6 billion to the Bahamian economy. The question for me, how much did Bahamians benefit from that $6 million? And secondly, for me, how much of that went out of the country and how much of that remained at home? I would venture to say that in our current state, maybe as high as 85% of this is spent overseas and maybe 15%. Just think if we were able to spend 20%, an additional 5%, what an impact that would be on our economy. The second thing about this is that encouraging and enhancing local sourcing. Things Bahamian are good. Not everything has to be made in whatever. More things should be purchased at home. And this may be somewhat of a socialist type approach, but as governments consider heads of agreements, there should be maybe some minimum thresholds for expenditure within the Bahamian economy. Now, I know that is music to the ear of a politician, but maybe for some companies, I think the heart is there, but we must find a way to make it happen. And when I talk about enhancing local sources, we have to make it easy for them as well. A lot of people said the produce exchange never worked. We need a modern day produce exchange where we can bring products to market because we have such a huge cottage industry and a whole lot of farmers who don't have the skills to market and to provide, and then bring the end users to them to purchase. I think this is a very serious way in which we can increase outsourcing and purchasing locally. Investment policies and practices. Access to capital is critical. Access to relevant training and mentorship is important. And access to markets are extremely important. We must find a way to encourage more Bahamians to take ownership within the hotel sector. The reality is that we have no real control of our destiny until more Bahamian entrepreneurs invest in the tourism sector. There are many Caribbean islands who did a fabulous job of making this work, but we must begin to move with that because we will create some sustainability and resilience and ensuring that these properties will require from time to time refurbishment and refreshing. But Bahamian ownership will ensure that they're here for a period of time, and then the direction for things Bahamian will be enhanced. And you'll see much greater involvement in the elements that are there. Minister, you and I have this conversation all the time. Tanya was on this committee too. We must lay out red carpet and not red tape. The ease of doing business in our country must be given serious consideration. To be compliant is just making it so difficult for companies to operate. Large companies have the manpower and the ability to address it. Smaller companies are frustrated. And so we have to find a way to make this work. So I've outlined 4 or 5 critical, some controversial, ways in which we can address this untapped participation in our economy. But for me, a larger share of the tourism dollar being utilized at home rather than abroad, and B, encouraging Bahamians to take a bigger share of that proverbial tourism pie. Thank you.
Mr. Sons, if I could, with just a follow-up question. You said something, or you spoke to a particular area that resonated with me, and that's the lack of Bahamian ownership in hotels. I have found myself in this conversation over and over, and I have to ask you, why is it, from where you sit, you're many years in this industry, why is it that Bahamians still do not have any real ownership in tourism outside of these smaller businesses that depend on the larger hotels bringing in the guests in order for them to strive? Why is it that this has been something that has eluded us for so long? Why don't we own hotels?
Well, you know, Bahamians generally don't take risks. The hotel industry is a risky industry. We fall foul to many shocks, hurricanes, economic turndowns, pandemics, etc. And, you know, the financial sector sometimes are not always as willing to support Bahamian enterprises unless their pockets are deep. And sometimes in this business, you really need deep pockets to sustain itself. But I am hopeful, not necessarily in the mega hotels, because I believe the true future of tourism is not in New Providence, but in Family Islands, where there are small boutique-type resorts, anywhere from 25 to 50 rooms around the archipelago that will support those individual economies and make substantial amount of money, hopefully supported by the financial institutions. And that is the way of tourism for the future for the Bahamas and its future growth.
All right, so we don't have as much time as we would have liked. So I'm going to move to a lightning round, I will call it, where we try and get in a few more questions and possibly try and get 1 or 2 audience questions. But Minister, I'm going to begin with you. Growth is expected to return to its long-term potential of around 2% in 2024-25. What policies are being considered to increase the growth rate and bolster potential growth, especially given that stronger growth is necessary for more substantive employment gains?
This is a lightning round, so my answer has to be short. But
comprehensive.
It's music to my ears to hear the chairman of the Bahamas Hotel Association speak about their desire to have more Bahamian inputs and consuming more Bahamian products in the hotel. That's something we agree on 100%. We believe that you need growth in the region of 3 to 4% to absorb the new entrants into the job market. And so the policy is to continue to pursue FDI, to bring in the foreign currency, but as well, the government has a program of infrastructure development in the Family Islands, particularly with the airports. And again, linking with what Mr. Sands has said, in the aftermath of COVID and the taste and the appetite of the tourists now moving more towards the authentic, the smaller hotel experience, I believe that opens tremendous opportunities for more ownership, the sizes that Mr. Sands spoke about. So those change in appetites present that opportunity. The last point I want to make on this, because I see the clock winding down, is when we speak about ownership. Long time ago, we had something called the Hotel Corporation of the Bahamas that owned hotels. Not as successful as we would have liked it to be, but I believe that we can learn from that experience and use a model of collective funding, private management, the accumulation of private capital, i.e. People investing in some sort of fund model, put in place the management, and then you have ownership by that method, supported by the government concessions, et cetera. So I think there's an opportunity because of changing tastes and because of past experience and lessons learned that we can attack this problem of ownership.
Ms. Hutter, to you, how is the tertiary education system being tailored to amplify existing and new opportunities in a tourism and technology-driven new economy?
Two ways. First thing that we've been doing, that we've done, the first thing that we've done this year, we need to get closer to the labor market and the employers. We need to make sure that whatever we do is actually responsive to the labor market. We created program advisory committees for all our programs that bring together people from the industry, employers, recent graduates, to work closely with our faculty and say, are there deficiencies in our programs? What should they be? How do we make sure that they really are tied much closer to labor market needs? That's number one. The second thing is we need to increase our capacity in research, but particularly applied research, around areas of climate change, I'm going to say financial services. What are the kinds of areas that the university needs to be doing research on to provide practical policy solutions to issues that the country is dealing with? I think those are the two largest contributions we can make. Make sure we bring the industry closer to our programs, for them to tell us what we need, and make sure that we carry out the applied research that's going to support innovation and development. And to that end, we were just hiring new positions in innovation, and we're looking also at a research position. And again, it's going to be about working together, working with others, working with employers, working with government, working with central bank, and getting postdoc fellows coming in to help us. That's the work that the university can do.
You mentioned climate change, and in broadcasting, we call that a segue. So we're going to segue your comments into my next question to you, Mr. Sands. In the area of climate change, adaptation, and risk mitigation, the Bahamas is expected to lead by example. Is there an upside potential for tourism? How can making the tourism operations greener provide competitive benefits for us here?
The reality is that the tourism sector has suffered the most as a result of climate change, destruction to buildings, erosion, the level of the product within the various facilities. But certainly adaptive capacity measures are very important, such as ensuring or even mandating hurricane insurance, number one. Architectural designs that are suited to adapt its client. You know, we got to get away from this building this hotel right on the beach concept. The time has long passed now where we have to come away from the coastline, sufficiently enough put in protective barriers and seawalls, etc., for wave action and so forth. These are critical issues that we must put in place to mitigate potential risk and the ability to adapt in that particular area. And also, we must introduce programs that are interactive for guests. More and more guests, as a result of COVID, are looking for things natural, environmentally sensitive, contributing to the health and well-being of individuals. So things that are restorative, like programs we currently have with the Bahamas National Trust, guests getting involved in planting mangroves, guests getting involved in replanting of corals for the rebuilding of the environment, guests getting involved in the sustainability actions of not using certain types of plastics and conforming to bulk water and the providing of utensils that they can take back that are biodegradable or do not have the negative impact. Hotels becoming much better involved now in the Bahamas in terms of separation of garbage and how we dispose of garbage, etc., and greenery. The whole issue of just a more environmentally more conscious element in our operations today will go a long way in terms of how we attract a higher spend visitors. If you go to many hotels today, they're adding new facilities, not inside, outside, covered. People want fresh air environments for dining. They want farm-to-table produce. They want organic elements. These are all elements that we can help towards this whole question of climate change, but also contribute to the economic well-being of Bahamians who are greatly involved in some of these ventures.
So thank you very much for your response. Based on our time, we unfortunately cannot have a question and answer, an open question and answer, but I encourage you to engage our guests following this event with any specific questions that you might have. Let's give our panelists a round of applause, please, and thank them for a very engaging conversation. Thank you very much. I will also now welcome to the podium our Deputy Governor, Mr. Derek Roll, to bring closing remarks and some presentations to our guests. You can just remain.
All right, good evening, everyone. So nearly 40 years ago, their collective governorship marks of the T. Baswell, Donaldson, and Sir William C. Allen are still etched in the work and the culture of the central bank. This is a testament to the remarkable and visionary leaders embodied in each of these two governors. Hence, it was imperative that we honor them in the Central Bank of the Bahamas' 50th anniversary celebrations. And what better way to do that than with this memorial lecture, which showcases the shared passion for education and development of these two extraordinary men. As we bring this evening to a close, on behalf of the Central Bank, I would like to first thank Mr. Yolande Donaldson and Lady Aloma Allen and their respective families for continuing the legacy of the former governors and for their continued support to the Central Bank as we carry on the exemplary work that they both started. To our keynote speaker, Dr. Tanya McCartney, your address on inclusion and resilience was enlightening, but particularly timely given the existing economic climate. It also set the stage for a dynamic discussion from our esteemed panelists and our moderator, who shared their unique and insightful views on the way forward. The Bahamas celebrated 50 years last year, commemorating 5 decades of social and economic advancement. As we look forward to the next 50 years, it is imperative that we have discussions like this one on what will drive sustainable growth in our economy, what prospects look like for each productive sector, and what roles each stakeholder will play. Tonight, your contributions did just that. I would like to thank you all in the audience for participating in tonight's lecture and for engaging with us, and I'm sure you will engage with us even further afterwards. I would like to thank the Central Bank Choir for their great rendition tonight, and Archdeacon Palacios has left, but I would also like to thank him officially for the invocation. Also, thank you all to the Central Bank of the Bahamas staff, and particularly the 50th anniversary committee that all helped to organize this event. I would also be remiss if I did not thank Of course, Governor Roll for his participation and his thought process around engaging in such an event like this. Finally, I encourage you all, please, in the audience, to engage with us as we advance our 50th anniversary lecture series throughout the remainder of this year. It is our intent to host a lecture each month on a topic relevant to the central bank. The next one is scheduled for Wednesday, the 17th of July, which will feature a lecture on striking the balance between regulation and innovation. Thank you again for coming tonight, and please do join us afterwards for refreshments in the lobby. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That brings our event this evening to a close. Thank you. Congratulations once again to the Central Bank. As I move towards celebrating 50 years, I certainly will follow this model. 50 years again. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Please be sure and join us for the reception immediately outside. Thank you.